Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Today, I am having on somebody who I've known for a long time, Jonathan Saenz, who, when my dad was in the legislature, he was, I believe, serving for the Free Market Foundation, and he can maybe fill in those details for us when I bring him on in just a minute. But he eventually ended up breaking from Kelly Shackelford, who went in to establish First Liberty, which many of y'all are familiar with today. And he established what Texas desperately needed. We didn't have any organization solely focused on advancing socially conservative, pro-family bills in the legislature. We had big pro-life groups. We had big gun groups, but no group that was solely focused on advancing these really important policies. And if you think about the time when Texas Values started to the battles that we're engaged in today, it was a very good thing that it got established when it did. So Jonathan has been in the Capitol for a very long time advocating for these things. He advocated for these things on college campuses when he was a student. But what we're going to talk about today, I asked Jonathan on because many of you know that I've covered some of the things we accomplished. The Privacy Act, Senate Bill 12, the Parental Bill of Rights, the 10 Commandments back in classrooms, prayer in schools, things like this. All very good wins, some of which we've been fighting for a long time. And the bigger part of the conversation I want to have with Jonathan today is, what's next? What are those policy fronts that we need to continue to advance on that weren't addressed? Or what are things that we can now put energy and time into addressing that in sessions past, we had to focus on the women's privacy bill, for example. So with that said, let's bring on my friend, Jonathan Saenz. Mr. Saenz, how are you doing?
I'm great, Luke. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. When did Texas Values officially start? I was trying to remember the year in my head, but I want to say it was like 2011, 10, something like that, or am I wrong?
Well, and I'll take us back a little bit farther. I think that you were an intern in your father's office when he was serving in the legislature. You might have been in high school. I don't know how far apart we are in age. Maybe you were in college, but I know that you were very young at the time. But I do remember meeting you then. You know, Nathan Macias, great state representative, somebody who Kelly Shackelford, my boss at the time, said, make sure you meet him, go interact with him. And so that office was always a friendly office. And for me, young in my career, I like to identify those friendly offices very soon and then visit them quite a bit. So Texas Values started in 2012. So you are correct that Free Market Foundation was the name. Sometimes Liberty Legal Institute would be a name that entity would use. But a lot of times when I was a state legislature, it would be Free Market Foundation. And that organization was originally started by Richard Ford, but at some point, Kelly Shackelford came along and took over, and Richard Ford started doing some more election-related things. He actually started iVoter Guide. That was a project that they got involved in with Heritage Alliance. I forget the second part of that name that they started. But I was, in 2007 was the first session that I worked full-time at the state capitol. I started actually in February. It was after a January board meeting that the board of Free Market Foundation said, we might need to have somebody at the Capitol paying attention a little bit more. Kelly was on call. Shackelford was on call when needed, but it just felt like, they had overturned same-sex marriage, or they were, going in that direction. We had just fought off a lot of those battles by having a marriage amendment in 2005, but it just felt like we needed to have somebody a little bit closer for legislators to have access to testify and to have some expertise, particularly on religious freedom. But we were doing support work on pro-life issues and other parental rights and marriage and family issues. And we were having some really good success, I believe, or we kind of, figured out how to do things. And we're moving in a great direction, passed a couple of bills. And then First Liberty Institute, at the time, Free Market Foundation and Liberty Legal Institute decided they were going to become a national organization. So at the time, Kelly was primarily state-based, and he was what's called the Family Policy Council for the state of Texas. This is a network of state-based law and policy groups that are a part of a network that focus on the family, started under Dr. James Dobson. But then that role was taken over by Family Policy Alliance, which was sort of a spinoff of the C4 for focus on the family. But we were doing really well, and Shackelford said, listen, we're going to become a national organization, but we're going to need to still have a group that's state-based. You're already in Austin, because we had opened an office here in Austin we think it'd be a good idea to help you start your own organization. And so, Kelly, I said, well, listen, I'm only going to do this if you're going to be on my board and help, get us off on the right foot. And so they did. And, we've just been running and rocking and rolling, running and gunning. And we haven't looked back since then. But a lot of that has had to do with work that I had before that, but also developing those coalition partnerships, getting involved across a state. I mean, we're definitely a statewide organization at this point, 254 counties. We've got supporters in all of the counties. But, a lot of people didn't know who I was. I mean, I did a few things significant along the way. I sued my university when I was a law student at U of H to defend the pro-life group that I was leading. That got a little bit of attention, but, there's a lot to learn, as you know, in the legislative process and, developing trust with legislators and also figuring out the fact that there are more ways to kill a bill than there are to pass a bill. But over time, we've been blessed to, every religious freedom and pro-life law that's been passed since I got started, we were either a part of or we were leading. And that's not just about us. A lot of great groups, a lot of great elected officials that had something to do with it. But is certain that we're certainly proud of and glad that Texas is in a better place.
No, your first session in 7 would have been my first session, right? That was my dad's one session. And so it is kind of an interesting thing to realize where Texas was in 2007, where we are today, quite a bit later down the road. There was a story that, I don't know if you and I have even talked about this, but I have shared this in explaining to people how God will often take care to put you in places vocationally that align with your calling, even when you're not sure how you're going to get there. I had wanted to get into politics full time, and it was a goal of mine. I volunteered on a bunch of campaigns. I ran Ken Mercer's State Board of Education race. You and I would see each other at the State Board of Education meetings back then, and almost nobody was there at the time. Very few conservative activists were engaged on the work that happened in the state board. And you and I had this very brief conversation in 2010, and we were at the Republican State Convention. You were coming down, I was, and at the time, it was either 2000, I think it was 2008 or 10, but I'm almost certain it was 10. And you said, no, in fact, I know it was 10 now, because you said, hey, we're hiring up somebody to do a policy position. I think you eventually hired David Walls, who you and I are both friends with now. I think he's in Kentucky, right? Doing the family policy
stuff. He leads the Family Policy Council for the state of Kentucky now.
So he leads the Texas Values of Kentucky, right?
That's
and
right.
So, but he had not been hired yet. And you ran to me and said, hey, we got this job, apply for it. And in my mind, I was like, this is what I want to do. This is going to be my entree into actually working in politics. And lo and behold, an hour or two later, we got a really tragic call from my brother, who had a kind of a crisis in his family. Yeah. And so my dad and I left the Republican State Convention early, drove back, were with my brother, and eventually the crisis that he was dealing with led me into needing to stay in San Antonio. And so I had this brief moment of thinking, I will finally get to work in politics full time. 2 hours later, and then the next day I'm in San Antonio, and I'm going, there's no way. So I still worked for this higher education company that had nothing to do with politics, and just said, well, I guess at some point, maybe in the future, a door will open up, which is the only reason I ran campaigns was I was trying to do something that I could do from San Antonio. So I emailed like 10 people and said, hey, I'm going to start running some campaigns in Texas because I need to do this. So anyways, that's even a little story that I feel like is worth sharing.
I want to share something with you about that too. And it's great that you remember that, because I remember the encounter and the interaction we had in your father's office. I don't remember that, but it doesn't surprise me that we would have had that exchange. But, it's interesting because you think about some of those moments that seem like, it's a turning point or whatever. We have interviewed so many people over the years that it looked like we were about to hire them, and for some reason it didn't work out, and then they went and started their own business. And I love that there's so many entrepreneurial people that we've come across over the years. One of those is the guys that run Vici Media. Ryan came and was going to interview with us, and I was like, man, this guy's sharp. And then he was like, I'm either going to do this or I'm going to run my own business. And then he kind of, and several people, that's been great. And so I'm glad that you found your fit, and, you've certainly made your mark.
Let's talk before we move on to what comes next. I want to look at, I have talked about one of the best accomplishments of this session was the Parental Bill of Rights by Senator Brandon Creighton. And I know y'all are highly involved in that policy. It's very, I've explained that it's very rare that you get to pass a 47-page bill that accomplishes a lot of good things. Usually it's a 1 or 2 or 3-page bill that accomplishes just one narrow aspect of what you're trying to do. We're seeing some pushback from school districts. Can you explain to people how they're trying to get around not being able to infuse kids with this gender ideology through nursing and counseling and things like that?
Well, unfortunately, the education establishment and a lot of these people, employees that are oftentimes controlled by Democrat or liberal teacher lobby groups and so-called trade groups and entities like Texas Association of School Boards, TASBs, it almost feels like that's how they make their living, is finding a way to help these people get around any state laws that we pass. And it's frustrating, right? The amount of work it takes to pass these type of laws. And, it's not, the goal is not just to pass them, it's to actually implement them so we can have them doing great work in our public school classrooms. And they'll find a variety of ways. A lot of the ways that they get around these things is by this element of fear and secrecy, right? They will do things in hope no one will say anything, or they'll suggest that, a parent's being too aggressive, or why are they asking so many questions, that there's some type of line that's being crossed, right? They'll make it very uncomfortable or difficult for people to go through an administrative process to find out what's going on. You'll try to schedule a meeting and it'll take forever. So there's a variety of ways that we'll see school districts, try to get around state law. I've seen this before, where TASB will suggest to school districts that, yeah, that's the law, but there was this other court ruling, and we think the court is moving in that direction. So, check with us before you decide to follow it. And so they're getting a lot of support in many ways, giving them reasons, I think, to say, maybe we don't have to. Maybe we can pick and choose. It's not whether or not we follow the law because of what it says. It's whatever TASB or somebody else tells us to do. We passed a law in 2013, one of the first full session for Texas Values, that was about protecting Christmas and the discussion, celebration of it, symbols of it in public schools, right? And so shouldn't have been that controversial. It was a bipartisan bill. There were some Democrats that voted against it, but there was a good amount of support, but it was solving problems where we were having lawsuits all the time, not just in Texas, but in other states as well, but certainly in Texas, on issues that the Supreme Court had already resolved. So we're just trying to put into law what the Supreme Court's already said and make it less likely that we have to litigate these issues and have some guidance for school districts. A couple of years later, we had a school district in Killeen where this issue came up. The Attorney General of Texas, and it was Ken Paxton at the time, sent the school district a letter and said, this is the law, this is the correct interpretation. In the school board meeting, one of the school board members said, well, we have a lawyer that says something different, so we're going to follow him. Like, great, I will see how that works out. And they ended up losing to us in court. But I think that is sort of, what is the overarching thing that happens is school districts, instead of just following the law, or even if the Attorney General sends something and says it, they're always looking for another reason to believe otherwise. And some of that's happened over years, right? I mean, because of lawsuits and different things, and school districts getting away with a lot of things, they think they have the ability to just pick and choose and they're not going to be held accountable. And so, but that's all going to end, and it's been ending for a while, but the pressure is going to start coming down quite hard on these school districts, and rightly so.
Yeah, so some of these school districts, right, are trying to get around the parental consent aspect of what you're doing, and we've passed a number of parental consent requirements this session that says, hey, if you don't have a parent's permission to do X, Y, and Z to their kid, then you can in no way engage in that type of care. And then other things we just prohibited, right? Like you can't trans a kid, period, ever, even with parental consent. But now these schools seem to be putting everything on one form, where if you want to consent to the nurse being able to put a Band-Aid on their knee, then you also have to consent to everything they could possibly do to your kid within the law. And these parents are reading these forms going, wait a second, I just want you to put a Band-Aid on his knee if he falls down. And they're like, well, then you have to literally give us permission to do every single thing we could possibly be permitted to do to your kid.
Look,
That's where
I've
you're
seen
seeing,
that.
to your point, they're trying to work around it.
No, I've seen that too, being reported, and it's concerning because, I mean, that's the first thing I think is this is just another strategy by these people to find a way to get around following a law that many of them do not want to follow. They do not respect parental rights. They want to keep everyone even further at arm's length. They think that your children belong to them at the government school. And in many ways, they're grooming kids to think first that your parents are suspect. And instead of the instinct being that the parent's right or the parent has the children's best interest at heart, at heart. And look, there may be some bad parents out there. We know there's some things that happen sometimes that none of us would approve of, but that is typically the exception. And there's no reason to say that we should, our first instinct should be to second guess parents, but it's even worse than that. I mean, they're grooming kids and coaching them in many ways that they're hiding things from parents. And those teachers are saying, listen, you can tell me because, you can't trust your parents. And I just think that that's something we see a lot of, and that this is sort of a continuation of that, in my opinion. But it makes it harder for parents, right? They're putting more of the burden on parents when the burden is on them. The responsibility is on them to follow the law. And so I do think there are ways that we can address that. And unfortunately, I think it helps to have the law, but we are going to have to engage in some efforts where we push back and we single out certain school districts to make sure they're following that law. We've done a lot of that work with Public Information Act requests, where with complaints, we know there's a lot more streamlined process for complaint processes and administrative issues at public schools that used to take a lot longer. So those are going to be put to the test too, right? In Senate Bill 12 and other bills, but at least we have some of that framework that we didn't have before. So there may be still some hard work to do to make sure that school districts know we really meant it when we pass this, and we're not let you get around some of these things. And look, that's where our organization does best, though. I mean, I say it all the time. We have a comprehensive approach to advocacy. We got to go in the courts. We got to go to the Texas Capitol. We got to go to a school board meeting. One of the reasons the Texas Women's Privacy Act was passed and was cited quite a bit, even though John Busey tried to, slander or say a lot of things that weren't true about us in Round Rock ISD, was because for years we were working with parents in Round Rock ISD and other school districts, Dripping Springs and others. But much of that was behind the scenes because these parents were afraid to come forward. They wanted to remain anonymous because they were getting so many pressure. We know in Round Rock ISD, Jeremy Story got arrested for going to a school board meeting and talking about some concerns related to these issues and others. So this hostile environment has existed for a while. And so if we have to, like we did with those parents and others, and I testified about this in the Senate committee hearing on SB 12, some of just, heartbreaking stories. But we will continue to do those efforts if we have to. People want to reach out to us for that help. We'll do that sometimes privately. If the people are much more comfortable being more public, I think that gives us a stronger case to do that. But we are going to have to be vigilant in that way and make sure that we're making it clear and we're a part of making sure the law is implemented.
The Women's Privacy Act, and this is the last thing we'll talk about that was accomplished before going on to the next thing, but I do want to recognize and kind of get your perspective on how far we've come since that act was first proposed. When that idea was put out there by our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, I think I will give him credit because to my recollection, he kind of spearheaded the insertion of this is going to happen. But we had Joe Strauss as the speaker at the time, and the quote unquote business community really worked pretty hard to kill that bill. You remember this, right? Mike Pence in Indiana was the governor, didn't want to push the policy because the business community put pressure on him. So where we were at the time was this place where the Chamber of Commerce had a lot of influence. And even in Texas, we could not get this policy across the finish line. We come in, and it did die this session. They passed a bunch of other bills, but the governor forces them to come back to deal with the women's privacy bill as one of the items on the call. It passes, and you didn't see the chamber and all these groups work extra hard. Some of them did testify, but as a whole, they kind of knew this is going to happen. So what does it feel like when you have a policy like that, Jonathan, that you've been in the trenches on for so long, finally get it accomplished, get it across the finish line, and to see how there's almost this inevitability around it where some people who have been really loud in opposition start to even pull their opposition?
Well, first of all, I want to start by acknowledging Pastor Dave Welch, who passed away earlier this year, surprisingly. I mean, I think he was early 60s, but by all accounts, I mean, people figured he was going to be around for a little bit longer. Suffered a heart attack. I don't think there was anyone near him at that time, and they got to him a little bit later, and it was too late, unfortunately. But for so many years, he was the heart and soul of this issue, certainly in Houston, through the Texas Pastor Council, Houston Area Pastor Council, and so on. And you talk about what you wanted to do at the beginning of the segment and our time together when you were young in your career. I never sought out, or it never was my goal specifically to get involved in politics. I see that as a tool, a means to an end, right? We talk a lot about in our work, whatever tool we got to pull out of the tool chest. And I love being multifaceted that way, right? I mean, because you think about some of the conflicts we deal with, there's, you want to have every ability to attack, to defend, and to get your message and to have success. And, it may come from different ways that you're not expecting. And so you sort of need to know what all those pieces are and when to use them and when not. And so, but my goal was, I felt like the Lord called me to do this work. It really was Jay Sekulow on the radio saying we need more Christians to go to law school. Nobody from my family went to law school. My sister and I were the first in our families to go to university and to graduate. And so, it's kind of a trailblazer in that way, but not, someone who had all this history of being an attorney. And, I was the first in my family and still am. I just heard the Lord tell me, I need you to serve. Right. And so as I continue to move in that direction, I would find myself in places where, okay, listen, if I got to be more involved in Republican politics personally, and sometimes with our work, then that's where I'm going to get involved. That's where things are happening. And those are the people that are having an impact on moving. I got to get involved in some elections and support candidates and all those different things. I got to take my court training and use some of that from time to time. And I'll tell you, this issue took all of those pieces, if not more, some things that we had to pick up along the way. But much of it did start in Houston when the mayor of Houston, Anise Parker, passed an ordinance that would have required private businesses and arguably maybe churches to allow men into the women's bathrooms and who knows what other private places. And there was a lot of pushback from pastors. Their sermons were subpoenaed because they were talking about it from the pulpit. And then there was a huge effort with many people that were able to get this issue on the ballot, which about some ballot initiatives, good luck. I mean, that is an uphill battle. Your chances of winning are slim to none. And I'm not trying to be, negative or to discourage any people. I'm just being honest. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but that, you're really pushing uphill and it's very difficult and you're probably not going to win, but you might, right? And so the chances of us having some success on that, most people were like, that is a waste of time. We're not going to get anywhere. But I remember putting one of the first press releases out on this issue and saying, by my analysis as a lawyer, and you maybe didn't have to be a lawyer to figure this out, but I felt like it helped me a little bit there. I put the pieces together with the statute and the ordinance, and I'm like, wait a minute. This means as a result of this, what did they call it? The
HERO ordinance?
The Houston Equal Rights Ordinance.
Yes.
HERO. Okay, that was their acronym. Clever. Anyway, I put the pieces together. I'm like, wait a minute. This is going to mean that businesses have to allow men and women's bathroom. And I put a press release out and people are like, oh, that's ridiculous. You're exaggerating. That's absurd. And I remember having a second thought before I put it out because I'm like, people are going to jump all over me. But I think that's what this does. Long story short, we went to the ballot box. The voters overwhelmingly rejected that ordinance, 61-39. It was historic. I don't know if you remember this, Luke. This was close to the presidential election. Hillary Clinton came down to Houston and put out a statement. Barack Obama. It was crazy, the whole national issue. But after that, the next session was 2017. And so, Lieutenant Governor felt like, from Houston, Dan Patrick, this is a time to strike on this issue. We thought the time to do it was then as well. But the argument hadn't been developed as much. There were some people that didn't realize some of the aspects to it. I'm not trying to make excuses for our side, if you will, but there was still a lot going on this issue that people just were not ready to do with it. And I mean, we got our head handed to us. I mean, we got completely run over during the 2017 session, in large part because to your point, there were some people that convinced some soft, moderate people in the business community that was going to be a disaster, even though in North Carolina and other places that where they did this, it wasn't true. But everybody just freaked out and just got really nervous without a whole lot of evidence. They said that the Houston Super Bowl was going to get canceled. It didn't get canceled. I mean, it was great. I went there to one of the parties, one of the family parties before. And so, but there were a lot of those boogeyman arguments that were made. And so we just had to take it. Another thing that was key, Luke, you remember this. I was talking about this morning to a state legislator, as a matter of fact, that Speaker of the House, Joe Straus, when it looked like we might actually pass something, it was kind of a weak version, but the House did pass something that the Senate almost concurred with. But Joe Straus said, he held a press conference by himself and said, this bill's dead. And he killed it on his own. So look, but we just kept coming back every session, and session after session, there were more examples of how this was a problem, right? The Biden administration trying to force schools to do this, all these different things continued to bubble up to where a lot of people realized, you know what, the time has come, we need to get this done. And so I'm glad for the governor's leadership, and Patrick's been there all along. I'm fine with giving some kudos to Speaker Burrows for talking about this issue, making sure it was getting done during the special session. And, it's there. We were talking about this the other day. There's still a lot to process that I feel like it's not sunk in. But wow, it's one of the most important pieces of legislation that we've ever passed as an organization and as a state.
One of the things I did appreciate about Straus, I've said this a number of times, I think privately, so I don't know if I've ever said this on the show, but I liked that Joe Straus would tell you when he was killing a bill, because right now we have, you'll say, hey, is this bill going to pass? Like, oh, the chairman's killing it. And then we all talk about it. Everybody knows the chairman's killing it. On the floor, he'll tell his colleagues, I'm killing it, but it's never public. And one thing I appreciate about Straus is when he was going to kill some really controversial bill, he just said it. He would say, oh, yeah, we're not focused on that abortion issue. I'm focused on roads, water, and other stuff. And you're like, I completely disagree with you. It's why people are going to run against you. I ran campaigns against him. But he would just say it. And we do have a lot less people that actually share Joe Straus's ideology. So there's less people to say it. But the ones that are left, if you're listening, please just say when you kill bills, because it makes things much cleaner and easier on this side.
But Luke, you and I probably have heard some of those words privately sometimes with members. They may deny it later publicly, but and sometimes it's it includes some other not so kind words that go along with it nonetheless. So you got to be ready to absorb some things at the Capitol and move on. But we had one meeting with Straus the entire time that he was speaker. I think we met with staff a couple times, but I think it was his first session. And Kelly Shackelford came to the Capitol with me. I think he's come. I mean, it's been very rare over the past 10 years. This is one of the times that he did come. I think he had met Straus. Anyway, we just thought, let's bring Kelly, a little bit of star power, some strength and muscle, if you will. And Straus said, listen, I just want to be clear with y'all. I may not be your friend, but I'm not trying to be your enemy. And I was like, okay. I mean, I guess we know what we're getting, but that's that's what you got, right? And I think he went a little bit further on the enemy side sometimes. But nonetheless, you're right. I mean, there were times where he would be very direct, and you would have a pretty good idea of what you were getting.
Yep. Yeah, very much so.
Are you worried about your kid's future? You should be. I'm Charles Blaine with Texas Tomorrow. This is a show where we're going to talk about the issues and the people that are pushing the policies that concern your family, your home, and your kids. Catch Texas Tomorrow every Thursday.
So let's look at really what's next. I shared this with people during the session. One of the things I appreciated not only about the regular session, but this special session opportunity we had to get the abortion pill legislation that I know y'all were supportive of, and Texas Right to Life really spearheaded, and then the Women's Privacy Act, was that there's a certain amount of energy that you have to put behind every single topic, right? If we didn't get the Women's Privacy Bill this year, then Texas Values would probably be at the Republican State Convention saying this needs to be a legislative priority. And the lieutenant governor might make it one of his top 20 or 30 bills for the session next session. And all these groups would sign coalition letters and we'd get resolutions passed. And all this effort, you would be in the Capitol meeting after meeting after meeting, trying to get hearings and then getting people to the Capitol. So there's energy, effort, time, talent, and treasure that gets spent to accomplish a policy. So every policy you get this time is one less thing we have to fight about. And there's also then more opportunity as we look ahead. So that's what I'd like to get from you is some of the things. Now, it could be some policies that y'all worked on that fell short this time that are coming up. But also, where do you see the left opening up new fronts? Because I think that they are constantly, to your point earlier, just looking for one way to get around it, or they just find a whole nother avenue to get to the sexualization of society, the insertion of radical gender ideology and other things into the state. So give me your perspective from your vantage point. What are some of those new battles that we will be fighting next session?
First, I would like to look at every law we passed in the past 10 or 15 years that didn't have an enforcement mechanism in there that at all, or that wasn't strong, and have Jonathan Mitchell come up with some language for us that we can put in there that empowers, the public to do that, as we saw with the Texas heartbeat law and one of the pro-life laws passed this session. And look, it was significant, right? We had a law for San Antonio and Austin that makes it clear this session that you can't use local tax dollars to pay for women to fly to California and have abortions. Gavin Newsom and his big head. It looked big on the billboard on South Congress. Okay. They put a billboard on South Congress in Austin saying, hey, come to California. We'll pay for your travel to kill your baby. So we got that locked down. That law was passed. And then, as you mentioned, there was another one on enforcements for the chemical abortion pill, which has been, really a rising concern and issue. We often look at what didn't pass that we worked on and look from that point as a starting point for what we need to do next time. Now, that's not always the case. There might be something new that we're like, oh, wait a minute, we need to shift gears and work on this. There are a lot of pieces to the process, and we realize that too. Being in the game, right? We have offices across the street from the Capitol. We're the only faith and family organization that has someone at the Capitol every day during the legislative session. So we already prepared for whatever is to come, whatever we need to do. So there may be some things that rise to a little bit higher later, and we shift to that and go, you know what, we're going to focus on that because we know we've got all the tools. We know the rules and how things are played. We're already in the game. It's just a matter of how we're going to advance the ball or what the opponent's going to look like. But I will tell you, a big issue has been conscience protection and some specific religious freedom protections. Now, did we have the Merry Christmas law a few years ago? Did we pass a law that said you can never close a church for any reason in 2021? That was a constitutional amendment as well. Those are incredible, right? There's a lot of value to that. But several sessions we've worked on legislation, particularly in medical care settings and also in employment settings and in trade settings, where you have people, and sometimes it's in Austin or different parts of the state that are a little bit more liberal, where they make it very difficult for people to keep their job or run their business if they're not a part of a trade association, right? This is one example that came up where you've got people that are in the real estate business, and they're being required to do certain things. The State Bar of Texas, a lawyer myself, we're licensed. You've got the American Bar Association that a lot of times tries to push rules on us that single out Christians. And there are a lot of other areas where those issues have come up. And so we've worked on that legislation for 2 or 3 different sessions, gotten close. Tom Oliverson's been one of our key allies in the House, oftentimes Brian Hughes in the Senate, and we just haven't gotten there. And look, we got to strike while the iron's hot. You look at Trump in the White House, Abbott, Dan Patrick, whatever people think about Burrows, they did get a lot of stuff got done. There's some suggestion or belief that we're going to continue to move in a stronger position. And so those things may not all be aligned, right? And so you look at some of the things we've done to push back against the LGBT ideology and agenda in public schools and some other settings, incredibly important. And by the way, if I could say this, okay, because we didn't say it before, now that the law has been signed, I will tell you, Senate Bill 12, all right, just so people know what you're getting. Remember the Don't Say Gay bill? And I hate to repeat that phrase from Florida. Senate Bill 12 is like the Don't Say Gay bill on steroids. I'm telling you, it's one of the strongest things out there, if not the strongest, on this issue. But that conscience protection is important, right? And religious freedom's in the First Amendment of the Constitution, but it's all about how it's applied. So you got to update it with the current issues that are going on. You've got to make it clear in these settings, whether it's work, whether it's healthcare, all these different settings where we realize if we got to go to court and litigate these all the time, we will. Kelly Shackelford, Jay Sekulow, ADF, they'll have plenty of time to work on cases, but it's still not going to be enough. There's someone that's going to be missed, and you can only spend so much time doing that. And now is the time to have something strong in state law, because you don't know who's going to be in the president's office, who's going to be in the White House. We hope to have somebody strong in our issue. They had the Religious Liberty Commission meeting yesterday with Kelly Shackelford and a lot of great leaders. Dan Patrick's part of leading that effort. So the mood is there. The momentum is there. And so, I mean, I was taught this in law school. The law is a teacher. It is important what the law says. So while we have the opportunity, we need to be having some sweeping religious freedom protection in these other settings. And a big part of that is the Coach Joe Kennedy case. This is the coach who took a knee on the 50-yard line, was fired, and then won his football prayer case in public school at the U.S. Supreme Court. That was 3 years ago. Okay, not only did they overturn Roe versus Wade, but the following Monday, they ruled on the Joe Kennedy case, and they took us back to a religious freedom standard. They restored a standard to where the knee jerk is not that we're going to take away your religious freedom rights, that we're going to let them be allowed to be exercised. So that religious freedom standard that's been restored gives us a stronger position to have state laws like this that might have been a little bit more difficult before. We saw some of this play out in the Ten Commandments court case that's been filed. That's why I think we're in a better position, and there was more confidence on that legislation this session as well.
I want to break down the piece of legislation that we're talking about so that people kind of understand. I know you and I live in the policy realm, but my understanding, and this legislation passed the Senate this session, is that correct?
Yep.
And it was filed by Middleton or Parker. Who filed that bill?
Which one? The bill
about the conscience protection for professionals.
Yeah, I believe that Hughes filed it in the Senate and Oliverson in the House, but I think there may have been a version or two others where some other members got involved.
I remember this hearing in the Senate. I'd have to go back and pull the clips, but they ended up calling in the Texas Medical Association and the Realtors Association, and the Realtors Association wasn't there to testify, and Senator Charles Perry from Lubbock was like, get those guys in here. I want them to answer questions because I've got realtors here. They were actually realtors from other states that were testifying about how their realtor association has come down on them. And so then the questions were posed to the Texas Realtors Association. Hey, you have this code of ethics. And if I read this code of ethics, it kind of reads, which is what's happening in other states, that if a realtor on their own private time just takes a position that there's only man and woman, that there are only two genders, you could say they're violating your code of ethics and they could be reprimanded. And the only thing that the Texas Realtors Association kept saying was essentially like, well, we haven't done that to anybody yet. We don't think that that's legal, right? They didn't say that's illegal in the state of Texas. They were like, well, we're currently not kicking anybody out. But yes, these 5 realtors here have been kicked out of their realtor associations in other states, which I have my real estate license. It's not a big part of what I do, but I do 5 or 6 homes a year. And I know that if I all of a sudden
do that.
Yeah, if I wasn't a realtor, if I was just a licensed real estate a licensed real estate associate or whatever they call it, but not an actual realtor, I can't access the MLS, I can't get all your documents easily, then I really can't serve
You're out of
people.
business. No, I mean, it's over. I mean,
so break that down.
Yeah.
Can you explain real quick, just for our people, that specific bill? Because I do agree with you that that's going to be one of the bills we focus on moving forward. What exactly does that bill do if you're talking to a room of 15 people that don't understand public policy as well?
Well, first of all, we do have very strong religious freedom protection in our state laws, in our state constitution, and in the U.S. Constitution, right? Those things are there. We got a lot of court cases that establish that. But this would make it clear in state law that it applies to these circumstances, and the burden is on these other people to prove why they're going to violate your religious freedom, and that we'd have a strict scrutiny standard, which is one of the highest standards of review when your issue goes to court, and it would make it more difficult. In other words, these real estate entities and others would have a very high bar to prove why they're trying to kick you out of this association or force you to accept some type of rules in order to have a license. I've seen that play out in the State Bar of Texas. In order to practice law in the state of Texas, you have to be a part of the State Bar of Texas. There's really no other option, right? And I don't know if anybody caught this, but Chief Justice Jimmy Blacklock threw a little jab at the ABA, American Bar Association, about this issue in his speech, the State of the Judiciary, earlier this year in front of the House and Senate at the Texas Capitol, because it's been a growing concern. But you see it playing out in the real estate circumstances. There are dozens, if not hundreds of places in our state code that in order to work in some business or some type of topic of work, you have to have a license, right? So if the state or some entity can force the state and that entity, that agency, to take away your license, you're out of business, right? And so what they've been doing is requiring people to have sort of these, code of conduct, whatever rules about how you got to treat people and behave. Many of them are advancing these gender ideology issues, and that's the way they're leaning. And they've gotten away with it because there's sort of this public shame thing, oh, you hate gay people. They throw all these kind of things out to make people nervous. But we've got to make it clear that the religious freedom and conscience protections that we've always had since the beginning of our country, they apply in those settings as well, right? And so it means for the people that are going to try to deny your religious freedom rights, they have to know, if this goes to court, you're likely going to lose, right? They have to understand that the bar for them is extremely high, and for good reason, and that when they do lose, they're going to pay attorney's fees. There's going to be all kinds of penalties and pain for them to have to go through, which should be a deterrent so they don't do these things.
If
but
that is in
without it,
place, your local board of, so if these things are in place, then the San Antonio Board of Realtors, when somebody files an ethics complaint, and one of the stories that was shared during the testimony was a bivocational pastor in Oregon, I believe. I might get the state wrong, but I think this guy was from Oregon. So he's a pastor and then just does some real estate on the side because he can't, his income is limited with his local church. And they filed an ethics complaint. Another realtor can file it. So you could have some leftist activist realtor file an ethics complaint with you, with your local board. And then the San Antonio Board of Realtors opens up an ethics investigation and determines that you did indeed violate the code of conduct and their ethics standards. And then you're not a realtor anymore. And so what you're saying is this gets put in place so that that board knows that the general counsel for the Texas Realtors Association comes in and says, hey, you better not try to do this with this guy, this pastor in San Antonio, because he will sue us and we will lose and we will pay attorney's fees and it will be very costly. And then they're likely to back off.
Yeah, well, and real quick, the bill authors on the medical conscience issue, I was texting our policy director on this, Oliverson and Sparks, and I'm sorry about that, Senator Sparks.
Yeah.
Or the conscience protection bill, and then Senator Hughes and Representative Chairman Kane were on the bill that related specifically to attorney licensing. I'm trying to, there was another bill, though, that related to the real estate issue. I'm trying to remember.
I think it was
might have been covered in that, too. But
yeah,
nonetheless,
it was either Tan Parker or Middleton. So
I think I'll figure it out in just a second. But so the key here, though, is, and I want to help people understand this, and maybe it seems logical, maybe it doesn't, right? Because you've already got laws in place. You're like, why do we got to pass these new religious freedom laws? We already know we have a religious freedom. Because here's what happens, okay? Someone brings a case against you, a complaint or whatever, and they're like, yeah, you have religious freedom, but there's never been a case or there's no case law or any precedent that says that how it would apply if there's an LGBT issue, because these are new issues, and surely that's not okay. Right. Surely that, and we don't have a court case where the Supreme Court has taken up that issue. So maybe they would see it differently. Right. So it gives them a way to create doubt because these are so-called sort of new circumstances or fact settings that the law's never been applied to. Right. So with having laws like this, we're like, listen, we're not going through any of that. OK, we're making it clear in state law that the judge does not have to think. Nobody can try to, well, they can make the arguments, but there's not going to be any merit to that. The law is going to say in these settings, this is how it works. You win like this on this type of issue. And it's just become necessary. I mean, you think about, how much it costs to get a lawyer involved, to go through the process. Who knows how long it would take? I mean, think about what happened during COVID. Okay. On the criminal and civil side, courts and cases being delayed for years. Crazy, and you might find yourself in a circumstance like that. And now you can't pay your bills. You can't feed your family. And the other side's like, well, all we got to do is file a lawsuit. Maybe we'll get lucky. And then in that threat of that scares everybody else to death. And they're like, well, maybe I should do some other business, or maybe, I'll just go along with this policy because what else am I going to do, right?
I
And
think
that's
it was,
what people told us, right? They're
I
not,
think it
I don't
was,
want to go to law school. I don't want to do these things because I don't want to have to deal with that issue.
I think it was Senate Bill 2713 by Mays Middleton related to preventing discrimination in membership in a professional or trade association.
Yeah,
And so that
that's
bill
right.
passed out of state affairs, went to the Trade and Workforce Economic Development Committee, which is chaired by Angie Chen Button. They had a hearing on it and then killed it in late May. But so we've talked about the religious liberty front. You have the medical professional side of it. You have trade association side of it, the legal, the lawyer, being an attorney and being kicked out of the bar side. So multiple bills. That might be one bill, that might be three bills, but those are some of the fronts. When it comes to transgenderism and the I would say the transgender agenda and its attempt to insert itself anywhere it can in society, with what has been accomplished, where are some of the remaining What are some of the remaining policies that you think we need to address on that front?
Drag queens. I mean,
Yep.
enough already, right? And we had a law that we tried to pass this session on an aspect of this that didn't get done. I mean, I think it was a Senate priority bill, right? Senate Bill 18. I'm trying to remember the bill number. And we had a law that we passed last session that dealt with some aspects of this issue, and it's hung up in court, right? I mean, we had a federal judge in Houston who I'm like, okay, it's time to retire, Judge Hittner. All right, seriously, okay. But nonetheless, I mean, that remains a very big concern. And a lot of this is sort of foundational, right? The culture, a lot of people are like, oh, what's the big deal? Sort of the more that the other side delays these laws or they get hung up in court, it sort of suggests that there's been this cultural movement in people's minds as well that, these things aren't that big of a deal, just live and let live, and act like, the culture and society has moved. So we just have to sort of start accepting this. Absolutely not. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to continue to be very aggressive in that sense because and these things are a lot of Democrats agree. You're talking about sexual performances in front of kids. I mean, the amount of effort the other side is doing to try to convince people what you're seeing is not really happening. I can't even watch some of it myself, right? You and I've talked about this.
Yes.
We oftentimes don't post them because I struggle with it because I hate to put out stuff there that's so graphic. Maybe we can find a way to, blot some of that stuff out or, whatever, blur the screen. But it's out of control. Right. And I even am concerned, we're usually like, we don't try to mess with churches, even if they're, far left. There's some religious freedom there, I guess. But I've had it with these churches that are doing drag queen performance shows. I mean, what in the world is going on? Right. Mm-hmm. But in the absence of a state law, in the absence of some significant pushback, people are going to start thinking, well, what are you going to do? I mean, I guess, it's just kind of part of where we are now. Absolutely not. So you will be seeing a lot of work that we'll be doing on that as well. And, people can say all they want, gosh, why do we have to pass laws like this? Because we have to. Okay. Mm-hmm. So get over, your annoyance by that and frustration. That's where we are. I mean, will it be a priority item at the RPT? I mean, will it get cobbled together with something else? We'll see. Yeah. But that, again, as I was mentioning, that those are related to bills that didn't get done, and we need to start there. But, it's a big issue that we need to address.
No. So, and I think I've talked about this before on the show, but even the one that says, hey, if you're a taxpayer funded library and you host a drag queen story hour, you're not eligible for state grants, right? Like, we're not going to specifically make sure that you have access to this pot of money that we give libraries because you're hosting these drag queen story hours. That bill died. Your point is that drag queens, it's not just one aspect of it. I've said this before, but culture is what you honor and what you shame. And culture, families have a culture, churches have a culture, cities, counties, and states have a culture. And ultimately, if we are going to permit these sexual drag performances all over our state in the presence of our children, we are giving that level of behavior a certain, just by permitting it and saying this is totally legal in front of a child,
like it's a
that says something about your culture.
It's ridiculous.
Right. And so...
this is what bothers me about it too, right? You could be walking through the park with your dog and your kid or whatever, and then there's a performance. There's no notice. You have no warning. Why? Because that's not what you should expect to be happening. And they are capitalizing on that, right? Mm-hmm. They're capitalizing on some form of like sort of a, captive audience, right? They know you're going to walk through there. They know this is where there's a high traffic area, right? They're sort of, and I mean, you could say they're sneaking up on each other or whatever you want to call it, but in Taylor, Texas, we dealt with this a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. Why is there a drag queen float at the Christmas parade? There was not a drag queen at the manger scene, right? In, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, there was no drag queen. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's clearly evidence that the other side is trying to jump in front of these spaces mm-hmm. where they don't belong, but there's going to be a lot of people at the parade and say, look at us, we belong here. And, you're sitting there getting a candy cane thrown at your kid, and all of a sudden, what are they going to throw at you from one of these guys? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? But again, and Taylor's, we push back, and they've got, I think, some better leadership now. And, but the results of that was they were like, well, the Christian group that is complaining about this, we think they're sort of the bad guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
You understand, the left get it because they're trying to get in your face so that they normalize this behavior, so that that people start allowing more of it. I have another question for you, and this came up because Texas A&M has its controversy that came. This very courageous young woman who's a student there goes and basically questions her professor, who's inserting a lot of gender ideology in the classroom, goes and meets with the president. The president of Texas A&M says to her, well, we need these LGBT studies classes that we give because we have people that want to be superintendents, psychologists, and all these people that need these classes. So this was the president of Texas A&M University. My parents are both Aggies, who's literally saying we need to keep these classes so that our superintendents are better prepared to be superintendents in the state of Texas. Yeah. I guess because they fully understand the entire 27 gender spectrum, area that somebody could emotionally express. And so I had a couple questions because you're a lawyer, you understand this issue well, you've been on college campus and fought for things. Is there anything in federal law that I'm unaware of, or state law, that requires Texas universities to have LGBT studies classes? Is this like do we need to change the law to get rid of the classes, or are they currently not required to have them?
I'm not aware of anything that requires them to do that. I mean, I think this is a judgment call by a lot of these professors or, these, leaders and brass, whoever, at some of these universities. And look, I think that this has gotten a lot more attention because it's at Texas A&M. I mean, I get it. I have, Aggies in my family, and I've been around. I grew up in Houston where there's strong, alumni of Aggies and just sort of that culture, and a lot of kids and families from the kids where my school attend. And there's that expectation that, and sometimes they're trying to have fun with it with me as a longhorn. Oh, well, my school. But it's, and I've met, I know people from the Rudder Association, right? This is a very important issue. The culture at Texas A&M has so much pride, has so much value in history, right? And it matters. And look, I'm not, trying to get involved in, whose school's better or whatever. Texas A&M University is extremely important to the state of Texas, right? They are one of the largest universities. They get a lot of attention, and so goes Texas A&M. So goes the state in many different ways, right?
Yeah.
And are there universities maybe that are smaller that would take a stronger position on this? Maybe, but I do think that this is getting a little bit more attention by that, and there's a stronger expectation. I will tell you, in my experience, because I'm around this a little bit more, don't be surprised if you see the University of Texas start to firm up on a lot of these issues as well. Mm-hmm. All right. They have a new leader, their new president, Jim Davis, that, he may not be as visible on some of these things, mm-hmm. but I'm telling you, there's some things going on there that are very encouraging and, good during this time. We've got to clean all of this stuff up, right? And it does have to come from the top down, because I think a lot of these things have been happening for a while and they just weren't talked about. Kids were scared because the law supposedly wasn't on their side, or it appeared that it wasn't on their side, or if they were to say something, they were going to get singled out and kicked out of school, whatever the case may be. Students are feeling a lot more empowered because of the change of the law, the change of the Trump administration, things of that nature, and saying, wait a minute, Charlie Kirk, whoever, people that are on college campuses saying, hey, you should stand up and we'll look out for you. So I think this is probably one of the best opportunities that we've ever had to get this right. And, people have got their different approaches, Brian Harris and others. We all have our different ways to deal with these issues, but, I'm glad that there's been so much attention about this. And so I do think, I want to say I was surprised. It was notable that I woke up this morning and I'm like, wow, Glenn Hager's already got a statement out, right? Mm-hmm. So there's been a response really quickly. Obviously, got a lot of attention on social media. I think the Department of Justice or someone in the Trump administration's taking a look at it. Whatever the case may be, it would send a strong message, because a lot of people are like, man, if we can't get it right at Texas A&M, where can we get it right? But so I, and I was actually going to call.
This is why Hager. I asked you that question, Jonathan, about do we need these classes? Because I do appreciate that Hager said what he said, which is, hey, we're going to punish this guy. But the one thing that I was concerned about on his statement, he basically said, hey, we're looking at it and it looks like they've taught things that are outside the curriculum. And I'm like, okay, I don't want the class to exist. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I don't think Texans want our flagship universities that make up, we are literally educating the next round of teachers, nurses, realtors, lawyers, doctors. They're coming out of those universities. Why do we have LGBT studies classes on our university campuses? And to some extent, you could say, well, as Senate Bill 12 and the Privacy Act and all these other things were needed because they were bigger issues at the time, right? You go, okay, I've got these LGBT studies classes at Texas A&M, but I also have the entire K through 12 system that is indoctrinating kids way more than just one class on a university. So one of the things that I've thought about is the fact that our university system is, we've reformed it to some extent, but nothing like the LGBT restrictions that were passed through Senate Bill 12 have been applied to universities at any level. And if you're a private university, you can do whatever. But we're paying, these things don't exist without our tax dollars. And I always say we're kind of paying to create the Marxists and then importing patriots from California. So I said we're trying to import enough patriots to offset the LGBT studies graduates that were graduating from Texas A&M University, right? And that doesn't seem like it's something we should be doing or paying for.
I mean, look, first of all, I think that there is a difference between maybe what gets taught at a K through 12 school and college level, university level, right? There's some sense that, exploring different ideas, breaking new ground or whatever. But we've been through this cycle. We've been through this saga to know this is bad to teach. Okay, this ideology has all kinds of political stuff related to it, right? There's very little left of it, if there ever was, about we want to, just make sure we protect everybody's feelings and stuff like that. And so the more that you teach it, you sort of perpetuate the idea that it has something good to offer for people. And I just don't think, I don't agree that it does. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to, teach something in a way that where you're demeaning people or suggesting that they need to be locked up because they may, one time feel like they're gay or that they were born, they're a girl born in a, boy's body, whatever, that people have some of those expressions or thoughts. But that's not what's happening on college campuses. What's happening is they're teaching it to try to convince you that there's something of value to it and that it's just the same as somebody, who's was born male and continues that way, right? That it's reasonable, and that it's, it's almost scientific, right? So if academia thinks that there's some value to it, then maybe there is something good that we should encourage more and protect, right? Then it becomes a protected class and all these different things. And so instead of, a topic that may come up or a conversation that may come up out of interest or curiosity because, you may see it happen in some place, I don't think that's been the approach for a long time, right? They've been pushing it, and in many ways, they've been trying to send a message, particularly to Christians and people that are conservative, that if you don't believe this way, there's something wrong with you. and maybe you should go to jail, right? And so I think there should be almost some time of cleansing before we decide whether or not, how it works, if anything like this is ever brought up in a course. But absolutely, the universities do not have to teach these topics. They're making a decision on their own. And if we have to go into state law, and like we do with the State Board of Education, and put some structures and some things in place that are more specific, that may be the only way some of this gets accomplished. But a lot could get done by the leadership at Texas A&M taking a strong stand on these type of matters, because it's just going to continue to come up, right? And they're going to realize, man, we should have gotten it right that first time. About this. I mean, Michael Sullivan reported on this a couple of years ago, right? There was a Corps cadet that was male, I believe, and wanted to go in the girls' bathroom. They were supposedly going to change a bunch of different bathrooms at Texas A&M to accommodate for this. It was behind the scenes, and then it wasn't, and they were going to use the money, then they weren't. I mean, it was a lot of controversy and drama over at Texas A&M. So it does appear that there's this struggle and back and forth, but a lot of that is because the expectation of people that attend that university, who pay for their kids to go there, or are alumni, and that whole culture is one where people think this is not the type of product that we should be getting. And I do think it creates a huge opportunity to get something like this right.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, if somebody is in Texas and wants to be more engaged in what Texas Values does, where do they go to connect with the organization and plug in?
So our main website is txvalues.org. That's where you're going to see the traditional 501c3 work, including an event we're having at the end of this month, whenever you watch this podcast. But on September 26th and 27th, we've got our Texas Faith Fest event. Super excited about. We're going to have some incredible panels, some incredible featured speakers. David Barton's going to lead the discussion about the Texas Ten Commandments law. Governor Greg Abbott and I are going to have a conversation. I'm going to get to ask him some questions about some of the things that he's been working on and so on. But 2 days of work where we're going to educate, motivate, and activate people on the issues of faith, family, and freedom. But I also want to say on our website, txvalues.org, new education program called Texas Values University. You want to learn from home how to talk about these issues. If you want to make a difference in your community, you want to run for office, you want to go to law school, you want to just be able to have a conversation with your kids and know stuff from the experts, we offer that. But we're a nonprofit organization. And then we got our 501c4 entity, Texas Values Action, where we make endorsements. We have voters guides. We do a scorecard after the legislative session's over, which we're about to get started on since the special session, second one just wrapped up. So a lot of good information from that entity. But look, whatever we need to do to make sure biblical values and Texas values are represented in our state, we're there to help. And we encourage people to go to our website, support us if you see value in that, but also reach out to us, get on our email list. People are surprised sometimes. They'll send an email in and I'll call someone. They're like, you're calling me? And aren't you busy? I'm like, well, yeah, I don't call everybody, but there's sometimes things that come through. I'm a real personable sort of outreach, in the public guy. I love to engage with people. Fifth generation Texan, I can't solve everyone's problems, but we think, we figured out a way to get a lot of good things done. And I truly care about the state. I raised my kids in the state. I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. And so love to have people connect with us, though, at txvalues.org.
I was at a birthday party on Saturday. I think you got a text from Eric, and his son is in a class with my son at school. They go to a university model school where they're there 2 days a week.
Judge or justice?
Judge. So Judge is with
I call
Nathan.
them the law and order brothers.
No, they boys are Judge and Justice.
My
and
gosh.
so Judge is there, and we're at his 6th birthday party, and my son's loving it because it's Harry Potter, and he got a wand, and they're all doing stuff. And Eric and I are talking, and we had not met previously because they just have been in school together, and he goes, "Oh, you do politics? Do you know Jonathan Saenz?" And I'm like, "I do know Jonathan Saenz." And that was Saturday.
What do you want to know? I know a lot.
This is 3 days later, and I'm having you on the show. And it just goes to show that one of the unique things about Texas is it is a small world, and a lot of people are connected closer than we think. Eric, and I know his family in San Antonio, have been very supportive of Texas values over the years. And a lot of people have. And that's also to just show the impact that y'all have had over the time. One of the things I'm appreciative of Kelly Shackelford for is that a lot of people, when they go national, when they start engaging in these issues across the country, they forget about the state that they come from. That's just the nature of politics. They go to D.C. and they stop talking about what's happening in Texas. And so I really do appreciate that Kelly had that forethought and foresight into saying, hey, I know I need this, but we really do need what Texas Values eventually became. And I'm grateful for the work that you've done in the state since 2007, my first session at 17 years old, and your first time being full-time engaged in that process. There have been a lot of victories, but I think one of the things that we at least established a little bit, I really do want to encourage people that one of the things I think the interim does is that if conservative grassroots want to accomplish something, now's the time where we start wrestling through and prioritizing a list of things that need to happen. And if we start now, we're much better prepared. We don't end up in a session where we go, I've never heard of that idea. Where did that come from? Why are you doing that? And so I wanted to start the conversation with you today with some of these protections of Christian professionals who are being persecuted, our universities and what they're doing, and then the drag shows, all these drag queens. Culturally, we would like to honor those people who care for a child's innocence, and we'd like to shame those people who are trying to sexualize children when this is not something that they were in any way designed. Honestly, adults weren't supposed to be exposed to this, but they have the freedom at some point to do that. But the child in no way does, and we have to find a way to protect them from that in society. So, Jonathan, thanks for what you're doing on all these fronts, and thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Real quick, Senate Bill 1970 was a bill by Senator Middleton on the real estate licensing issue. So if people want to check that out, we've got some, advanced people watching your show that want to go to the legislature's website. So listen, I appreciate the conversation. You and I have connected a lot over the years in a variety of different settings. You did some contract work for us early on in our career. We're trying to get going, trying to figure different things out. And I know we collaborate a lot, whether it's at the Capitol, talking about different candidate races, elections, having a shared Christian faith. And so it means a lot to me, to have those friendships and relationships over the years. But it also is something when I can recognize people that, are in this space and work really hard and are principled on what they do and are trying to figure out what do I do best and how can I fit into this equation. So, and you're certainly one of those. And I appreciate being able to connect with you on the show. I know a lot of people listen to your show, watch it, and care a lot about what you think. And, and it's great that it's not just me saying this. It's not just you saying this, right? There's so many different voices now from the state of Texas. But like myself, right? You're born and raised here, there's something special about our state. Doesn't mean if people came from California and they're here now, they couldn't do something great. But I think we sometimes feel a little bit more responsibility, to be doing things and to making sure that the freedoms and the values that we've been able to enjoy to some degree in the state of Texas, that they're there for our children, and their children and so on. And it's not easy, to keep your head on your shoulders in this space either, right? There are plenty of people that try to cut it off. And so, but that says something that, both of us have been able to find a way to make a difference in this space, for the shared values that we care about. And so I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Jonathan. God bless you.
Texas Scorecard is the place to learn about Texas politics. Be sure to click the bell, like this video, and subscribe if you believe in citizen-driven journalism. You can also go to TexasScorecard.com to read all things about Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.